Hello, my name is Andrew, and in today's video I'm going to be walking you through exactly what you need to do to score a top grade in English language GCSE. So this includes going through all my resources and past papers which were the exact things that I use to score a grade 8, and then I'm also going to be talking about what I think I could have done better in order to get the grade 9, because if you don't know me already, then I am a Cambridge student in my 3rd year, and when I set my GCSEs, I got 8 grade 9s, 3 grade 8s, and an A star. So, also, if you see me in this video waving myself like this, it's very hot. I'm in the Caribbeans right now. So, the first thing I'm going to go through is my resources, and just as kind of a bit of a warning, this, I did Edexcel, however the advice that I'll be giving in this video will be relevant both to AQA, OCR, Edexcel, but there'll be certain points when I say, okay, this specific technique is, or this specific timing technique is better for Edexcel. So I'm going to start off by going through the resources, which by the way, if you look in the description, I've included a mega pack of all of the exact resources that I used to get one of the top grades. I would recommend that you download this and read through them all because I think it's always very important to have something to have exemplar content to aspire towards. So then when you're creating your own writing, you can kind of have something in mind of structure ideas, ideas of how to use fancy punctuation, ideas of how to use pretty much the high level structures that are going to secure you the top grade. So the first thing that I wanted to talk through was how you're actually going to use this exemplar content. So I've got a story right here, which I did in year 10 and was a level 8. And then I've also got another one, which I scored a 9 in. It was my year 11 mocks. I scored 30 out of 40. And I'll show that here. These are all included in the pack that I talked about in the description. So let's first read an extract from the first story. And you will see that there had been a lot of thought that went into the creation of this creative writing piece. So the prompt from the exam board was write a story about family. So I start off by writing, "The blizzard attacks me from all directions, semicolon. The half-ice pellets dig into my exposed skin. I block out the howling wind when I slip through the door of our hut. Folding my snow-drowned coat onto the chair, I silently murmur, 'I'm back to the family.' I look up to see my mother motionless with her dead eyes. She doesn't do anything apart from sit propped up in a chair or, more often, huddled under blankets on her bed, eyes fixed on some point in the distance. There is no doubt of whom she is thinking, my father. He died just over 3 years ago in summer, and his ghost still haunts my mother day and night. I remember it clearly, although I was only 11 years old at the time, and my little sister Rosie was 7. The flames engulfed the bakery, scorching my skin as I urgently watched them singeing the surrounding trees. I prayed, no, begged to God to help the firefighters to stop the flames, licking the ground and eradicating all signs of life. There was one word to describe how I felt. Worthless. What seemed like hours later, the last straggling survivors were being lifted out of the smouldering ruins. The large crowd of crying mothers and children was silent. Fathers, brothers, and uncles were lifted and greeted by sobbing families. My sister and mother were desperately clinging onto the hope that he would be last, that we would once again see our father. Yet, we never again would. I was too tired or numb to cry. A young, emaciated woman spoke to the remaining, now depleted crowd and whispered quietly, as if she did not want to believe it herself. There are no more survivors. The blood drained from my mother's face, and my younger sister started to shake and weep. One time, when I was hiding in a nearby tree for motionless game to wander by, I dozed and fell multiple meters to the ground. It was as if the impact had taken every wisp of air from my lungs. I lay, helpless on the autumn leaves, struggling to inhale, to exhale, to scream for help. That's how I felt then. Since that day, I've had to hide my emotions, be strong for the family, as I now provide for them completely. My mother is lost to the world for most of the time. Mum, I shout. And she turns and momentarily sees me before immediately collapsing back into stillness. I look at my sister. It is late. Her snivels have been persistent, and I see some salty tears, nearly icicles in the winter storm, trickling down her face. Somehow, I hear a meow from outside, amongst the raging storm, and open the door reluctantly to let the cat into the house. Rosie lets out a gasp and cradles the cat, who purrs comfortingly in her hands. We have no means of making fire, so I huddle with my sister for warmth, after unpacking the wild turkeys from the bag onto the table. My sister, thinking she'd lost the cat forever, was overwhelmed with relief. The door creaks open. I assume it's Susan, our next-door neighbour, who helps care for Mum. Yet the incredulous exclamation of my sister leaves my mouth as dry as sawdust, and his name bouncing through my skull. Dad? So this was a piece of writing which, if you could not tell, was somewhat based on the Hunger Games. So one of my first tips is that when you are reading, just for pleasure, which I hope you're doing anyway, sometimes make a note of any descriptions that you thought were particularly pertinent, any uses of kind of higher level punctuation which you found interesting. So for example, when I was reading the Hunger Games, I wrote these descriptions. So I put, this is directly from the book. The anguish I feel when she's in pain wells up on my chest and threatens to register on my face. Another description was one time, and it was kind of similar about the idea of falling down from a tree. When I was hiding in a tree, waiting for motionless game to wander by, I dozed and fell off 3 meters to the ground, landing on my back. It was as if the impact had knocked every wipe of air from my lungs, and I lay there struggling to inhale, to exhale, to do anything. That's how I feel now, blah, blah, blah. So a bunch of other descriptions, but this, I think the most effective thing to do is to do this for emotions, or maybe weather, things like this, because these are things that you can use in every single creative writing piece. So for example, no matter what you're going to be writing about in your exam, you will have characters. Those characters, I'm going to take my glasses, oh, it's so hot. You will have characters. Those characters are going to have feelings. There is going to be weather. So these are things that you can use in any creative writing piece. So other things I put here, the rain interfer, oh, can't really read my handwriting, so let's find another one. Talking about, so for example, if someone's feeling hungry, mesmerized by the heat. Okay, the smell of fresh bread was so overwhelming I felt dizzy. That's not a very good example. But, for example, the rain interfered, running its icy fingers down my back, forcing me back to life. So that is a lot more interesting than just saying I was cold and it was raining. And so what I recommend you to do is to go through the document that I put in the description and go through all of the creative writing pieces that I did. Some of them are not my creative writing pieces. I included some of the best ones that I did throughout years 10 and 11. But then I also found some other pieces from OCR Edexcel and AQA exam boards of top grade answers. So these are ones that were given as exemplar content from the exam board of grade 8 or 9 responses. I think they were all grade 9 responses, actually. So those are the ones that I've got, if you give me a second, at the bottom here. So this is one from OCR, and it was actually the old GCSE, but it was a full mark response. And I went through this and highlighted the descriptions that elevated this, in my opinion. And then other ones, I found one online that was right at the opening part of a story about a place during a storm. Well, the thing is about these sort of descriptions, like I said, any story is going to have weather. So you can decide when you're writing a story in the exam, okay, so I think it's going to be raining in this passage. How am I going to really create a mood about this rain? How am I going to make it be how am I going to make it be a lot more interesting and stand out to the examiners to say, hey, look at me, I'm a level 9 candidate, instead of just saying it was cold and it was raining. So, for example, this one I found online about the description during a storm, and then I wrote a piece inspired on it about the beach. So I thought if I ever have something based on the beach, I can write about that. So I'll read quick snippets from these two ones. So the start of the beach description was this. The beach was a blaze of parasols, hot colours to match the burning sand underfoot. Against the percussion of the waves was the laughter of the crowd, coming in bursts, rolling like the ocean. The beach was gentle beneath my bare feet. Tips of shells peeked from holes made by little creatures seeking safety in the soft sand. Mini dunes of beige dust, soon to be soaked by the sea, were gradually creeping their way further onto shore. The sun's rays peacefully floated, resting on the warm waters. So I'm not going to carry on because you can read the rest in the document, but you see that you're not expected, I would not recommend you memorize descriptions like this, but if you read through them enough times, then, like I said, any story doesn't have to start directly with the action. It can start with like a zoom in, so you kind of see the weather and then you kind of then get discussing the main character or whatever the story is meant to be, or whatever the creative writing is meant to be about. So that was my beach description. I think I actually found that one online, I didn't write it. And then another one about the storm is this. Storms brewed on the emotionless horizon, promising nothing but winds to level even the mightiest of trees. Torrential rain poured down in icy sheets like needles upon my face. The wind didn't howl, it screamed. The rain was not falling, : it was driven, hard, merciless, torrential. The trees did not sway, they creaked, bent and moaned as their fine limbs were ripped away and their autumnal leaves became not confetti, but ammunition in the gale. Once again, very compelling descriptions. Oh, ignore my emails. So I'm not going to go through the other ones, but you can check them out in my pack. Now, I'm going to quickly show you how I would plan my responses in the exam. So one thing that I would be careful to do is not to overplan, because I think one thing that I would kind of do is I'd be very anxious in the exam that I need to remember all these details, so I'd write really, really, really long plans, and actually sometimes I wouldn't have time to write them all up. So really remember that it is quality over quantity. I mean, obviously you can't get top grades if you're just writing 1 or 2 sentences, but you don't need to be filling up all the room that they give you within the answer booklet. So they are going to give you an extra bit of space just in case you have particularly big handwriting or a long answer, but you're not actually expected to fill the entire space that they give you in the answer booklet. So this is maybe about how much planning you should be doing. This was actually just some revision notes that I made for the creative writing. I was kind of thinking about ideas that I could do before I got in the exam. So one thing that I did quite often, and sorry I'm focusing quite a lot on the creative writing, question 5 or 6 if you're at Excel right now, but one thing that I did which I would not necessarily recommend would be to kind of have an idea of different stories you could write in the exam, because what they don't want you to do is just to go into the exam having memorized a story and then writing it out, because that shows no creativity, and that's the entire point of the creative writing section. You're not meant to just get a good grade in the section by rote memorization. So, for example here, and I think this is what I kind of fell down on in my final exam, and that's why I scored the 8, not the 9, is that it is good to memorize a few sentences, in my opinion, like I said, describing the weather, because that can literally be slotted in to any story. Decide before the story, okay, what mood am I going to have? Is it going to be a sad, depressing mood? Is it going to be optimistic? Is it going to be is the story going to take place in the summer? So we're thinking about things like this, and that is good, but you don't want to be kind of having one story that you've memorized and then kind of use that no matter what the question is. So for example, I had this story about Corinne, who was a girl at the beach, and she, I'm not going to spoil it, but she meets somebody and has a very meaningful encounter. So this was very good, but I think I relied on this too much, and I can't remember what I did in my final exam, but it would not surprise me if it was kind of too obvious that I'd kind of memorized something, and then that was why I didn't score the higher grades. So I think definitely go into the exam with certain descriptions you can use again, and certain ideas of, okay, this is how I could use a semicolon, this is how I could use a colon. That's very good, but don't go in with a story that you're just going to write out no matter what the question is. You have to make sure that your story is relevant to the question. So I think in these two examples, it was fine because it says, write about a time when you met somebody new. So obviously, Corinne having this encounter at the beach is meeting somebody new. And then in my year 11 mock, it was write about a time when you or somebody you knew made something. So I kind of used the same similar sort of story again, but I added a different detail of somebody, like her meeting somebody new because of making a bracelet or something like that. So the most important thing is to make sure that your story or your responses are relevant to what is actually being asked, because you're not being examined on your ability to memorize a story that you've already looked at. So long story short, for the creative writing section, I would definitely say make sure that you are not just writing out something you've memorized. However, you can have certain sentences or certain descriptions which you can use time and time again, in my opinion. Okay, a quick little break from the longer writing section, which I know in Edexcel is question 5 or 6 for paper 1. I wanted to quickly talk about colleteducation.uk. So my mum is an AQA examiner for English language, and she's created a course which can really boost you to get those top grades, 7 to 9. So I'd encourage you to check that out in the description. Okay, so now my kind of essential guide, which I've got here, is going to constitute the second part of this video. Like I said previously, top tips for me is do not overplan, quality over quantity, and make sure you have enough time to check your answers. Because you've got to remember that even if you are a very good student, you've been scoring 9s, 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 or really, strong grades throughout year 10 and 11, your teacher, when they mark your work, they're going to have a little bit of a bias. If they know you're working really hard and they see that you've made a few punctuation mistakes, but they think, oh no, I know that this person is a very good student, so I'll give the benefit of the doubt. This is not going to happen in the exam. As cutthroat as it is to say this, you really only have those 2 papers to show what sort of candidate you are. The examiner has literally no idea who you are as a person. They don't know how hard you work. All they can see is this exam script in front of them. So you've got to remember that and not get complacent, in my opinion. So this means that you should be checking your answers, because if you make, in order to get the top band, you have to really be showing your consistent kind of mastery of the English language. So if you make several punctuation mistakes, but it's very, very well written apart from that, but because you've written so much, there's several punctuation mistakes, the examiner will not be able to put you in the top band because they won't be able to say, this candidate has consistently shown a great mastery of the English language. So make quality over quantity is a very important thing. And now I'm going to quickly talk you through the structure of Edexcel. However, if you're not taking Edexcel, I'd still encourage you to keep listening to this next part, just not the timings. Pretty much, it's very important for you to look over how many marks there are for each question and how long. So maybe do a sort of calculation of say there's 100 marks in an exam and there's 40 marks for one question. 40 divided by 100, 40%. What is 40% of how much time you're given for the exam? That's roughly how much time you should be spending on that question. That's kind of how you should calculate it. So here is the paper 1 timings for Edexcel. So question 1, they list 4 things for 4 marks, 2 to 5 minutes. Question 2 for language, it's 8 marks, so it should be 10 minutes. Question 3 is on structure, 8 marks, 10 minutes. Question 4, the statement and its analysis and evaluation, 20 marks, so 20 minutes. And question 5, writing, 40 marks, 45 to 50 minutes. This does not need to be exact, but should be more or less how much time you'd be spending on it. So for example, you should not spend an hour, 20 minutes on the creative writing, because even if you write the most incredible creative writing piece in the entire world, it's not going to be worth the amount of time that you spend doing it. So the first question I'd say, so this is the first bit of advice I'd say, so we're going through question by question here, is for the question 1 of paper 1 Edexcel, which I'm sure there must be equivalent for other exam boards, which is when it says list 4 things, or list this, or choose a word that describes X. Please do not overthink this question, because, for example, in my exemplar paper here, there's one answer that I think I did well and one answer I didn't do so well. One of them, in my year 10 mock, they say, from lines 1 to 2, identify a word or phrase which describes how the hand is laid on the narrator's shoulder. And I said, a hand laid lightly and suddenly on my shoulder. So that is 9 words. I didn't have to say, a hand laid lightly and suddenly on my shoulder. I literally could have just put lightly and suddenly. Or even just lightly or suddenly. So you see that you've got one line here. If they give you one line, they're not expecting you to use that whole line, necessarily. So it's only one mark, just a short description, lightly and suddenly. And I did that better in my year 11 mock, because they say, from line 1 to 3, identify a word or phrase, identify a word or phrase which describe it, cannot read today. From lines 1 to 3, identify a word or phrase which describes the color of the clouds, and I literally just put brown, and I got the mark. So this first question is just checking, can you really speak English? It's not a trick question, it's gonna be obvious. Question 2 for Edexcel is based on language. So remember, that sounds obvious, but it's based on language. So we're not talking about structure. Yeah, no introduction needed. It's 10 minutes, so 8 marks. There should be a small section of the extract which will appear above the question itself. And the question prompt says you could include, but maybe think of this as a you should include. So you only need to comment 3 to 4 elements for the language in the given excerpt, in the given extract, but you make sure to develop these fully. So we're not just doing feature spotting saying, this is this device, this is this, this is this. You have to say, this is this device and blah, 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 blah. Give a description. So for example, a bad example is the groaning wheels are personified and show the cart struggles in the extreme weather. But a good example would be the personification of the groaning wheels serve to emphasize the extreme effect of the weather. This conveys the physical force of the torrential storm as well as hinting at the perilous journey the passengers are undertaking. Moreover, the second verb used, creaking, hints at the inadequacy of the coach in such extreme weather. So I think that this is a very good example, however, probably written, this is not my resource by the way, it's just something I had from my year 11 folder. I think that's probably written by a teacher, so a lot of this time, that good example was excellent, but could a year 11 write that in time conditions? Probably yes, but it was a very, very good example. So the best things I would note about this is that you should not be writing really, really long quotes. You can write like maybe 3 or 4, maybe up to like kind of half a sentence, in my opinion, as a quote. And then after that, comment the individual words to say what is important about this quote. Which parts are we trying to underline to the examiner as kind of directly responding to the question. So for example, the second verb used, creaking, hints at blah, blah, blah. We're saying this word directly has this effect. Okay, question 3 is structure 8 marks, so 10 minutes. So again, for structure questions, use appropriate terminology. Once again, if the exam question says you could include, it's kind of a you must include. 3 to 4 points, or probably 3 to be honest, is the magic number. You don't have to comment every single thing that is going on in this extract. And I've got in the pink here some examples of what you can actually comment on structure. So this is the change in atmosphere, shift in tone, zooming in or out, widening the focus, sharp dialogue, omniscient internalization of the character's emotions, descriptive focus on visual aspects, repetitions and motifs of recurring images, and short sentences for effect. So structure is not just how long the sentence is, it can be any of those things. If you don't know about this one, I'd look on YouTube or even ask ChatGPT about what you could write about this sort of thing, because I think this is a question a lot of people kind of trip up on because it's it's a lot less obvious than the language question. And then finally, a statement or analysis, 20-mark question, 1 sentence intro or no intro. Make sure you read the question because it's only about a specific section of the text, and use reference to the writer, use reference to the text to support your point. And then finally, creative writing, what I just said. The form will be specified. So if you're asked for a story, give a story. If you're asked for a description, give a description. If you're asked for a description, do not give a story. If you're asked for a story, do not give a description. So a description doesn't necessarily have to have a plot, I think. It's just describing a certain setting. Be descriptive and show that you are crafting this piece. Use metaphors, hyperboles, and emotive language, and don't just try and write as much as possible. Vocabulary, don't just kind of shoehorn in words you don't know what they mean, but like we've said previously with our preparation for the writing, like the big writing question, we're going to kind of get used to having more complicated words and make sure we know what they mean and make sure that they're being used in the right context. We can try and use those and read over these for at least 5 minutes. Now looking over paper 2 for Edexcel once more, list 4 things, same thing. Get this done quickly, 2 to 5 minutes. Reading the sources, before that, 15 minutes. Summarizing key differences, 8 marks and 10 minutes. Question 3, language in one of the sources, 12 marks, 10 to 15 minutes. Question 4, comparing attitudes and views of writers, 16 marks, 15 to 20 minutes. And question 5, writing task, 40 marks, 45 minutes. Once again, not to be exact. Listing 4 things, same as I said previously, it's got to be specific. You don't want to be writing essays because this is literally just, have you understood what's going on? Have you understood the word brown, like I said earlier on? Yeah, if you're really stuck, don't agonize and lose time, just quickly guess, but do not waste your time on this question, that's all I got to say, just use your common sense. When we're talking about summarizing key differences, once again, no introduction needed, it's just an 8-mark question. So we've got to remember that if there's lower marks, this is for anybody, if there's lower marks attributed to a question, you don't really need to write an introduction because they're not expecting a full essay for just such a small amount of marks. Once again, 3 to 4 ideally, but just say let's 3. Detailed comparative comments is enough. And read the question super carefully because don't just kind of answer what you want to answer what the question is actually asking. So they might, like, if they ask about a particular element, say compare character A and B, or compare the impact of extreme weather on people in this extract, don't just think, oh, there was this really good thing I could compare, if it's not relevant. Answer the question. And that sounds stupid, but you've really got to believe in yourself that you can still write a strong answer even if you would prefer the question to be different. You've got to accept it. So for example, every point must be comparative, i.e., Eddie is a typical modern teenager who is cheeky and speaks to his father in a mocking voice, emphasizing their close relationship and good humor with each other. Henry, however, is distant and formal with his father, addressing him in a respectful tone, "My dear father," emphasizing the difference in status between them. So I really recommend you to just remember, like, the one thing I wish I knew was that, one thing I kind of wish I internalized more, I guess, was that quality does not equal quantity, because I would get used to writing so much, and actually you can really access the top grades without writing so much. You can make a more effective comparison using just a few sentences. It doesn't have to be whole paragraphs for each point. Question number 3 for Edexcel. So this is 12 marks. Read the question carefully and identify the particular part of the source. So for example, so they say, what is blah, blah, blah in the letter of Henry? Make sure you're just basing your answers on the letter by Henry and not any later letters that would follow in the extract. Aim for 4 key points because it's 12 marks, fully developed with reference to language details and subject terminology. For example, Henry uses direct address to his father, which suggests familiarity. You will not let blah, 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 or you will let me, and shows his future in the hands of his father, but this is contrasted by a much more distant and formal mode of address, "My dear father." This noun phrase is repeated in a number of places as an emotional tool to try and reinforce that his father is dear to him. Through the distance and the time-lapse of them being together, suggests to the reader this may not be so, and is a deliberate choice by Henry to appeal to his father. So that's on the way to a full marks answer. Then in question 4, when we're comparing views and attitudes of writers, this is 16 marks. Once again, only 16 marks, not necessarily intro needed. Read the question carefully. What are we focusing on? Same similar things I've been saying before. You could do this in your answer in the question, means you should do this. Identify language features and structural devices that form a key part of your views expressed. And then finally, for the writing task, which is 40 minutes or 45 minutes, some people like to do this before, like the very first thing they do in the entire exam is they just skip the first section and go to the question 5 to make sure they get it done in time. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this because I think that you're warming, when you're doing the other questions, it's like a marathon. It's like you're not gonna, well, I don't know, not a marathon. It's like you're warming yourself up. So if you're doing question 1, it's like, okay, I've done something easy. Cool. Question 2, it's getting a bit harder. Until you get to the last question, your brain is fully warmed up to write a longer response. Just make sure you leave enough time for this. Think about FAP, so form, audience, and purpose. Make sure you consider this. So what is the form? Is it a student blog, a newspaper, speech? Who is the audience? An educated readership, school assembly of peers, and what is the purpose? To inform, to persuade, and to entertain. So make sure you craft the response. So like I said previously, I can't find it, but kind of do quick notes. It doesn't even have to be this long about what you're going to write. And it can literally just be a few bullet points, but I think it's always advantageous to have a plan. And then read over your work and make sure you have time to craft your response. Oof! That is the entire guide to papers 1 and 2, so the entire English language GCSE. I'm exhausted just talking about it. But honestly, I think my main bit of advice in this time of the year, when it's just before the exams, is that make sure that when you go to the exam, you're not trying to use any last-minute techniques that someone's told you about. I know that might sound a bit ironic because I'm literally giving a video giving advice here, but my idea is that if somebody just before you go into the exam is like, oh yeah, make sure you use this word, it will really get you a top grade. Don't try and shoehorn that word in. Don't try and force some fancy word in you actually don't know what it means, because that actually does not show that you've got a good mastery of the English language. Make sure you're reading each question very, very, very carefully and you're answering the question that is on the paper and not the question that you want to be on the paper. And make sure you're giving enough time for each question. So before you go in the exam the night before, look at the exemplar paper online, look at the last year's paper or whichever papers you can find, and work out those timings. It doesn't have to be exact, but work out roughly, I should spend this much time on this question. And just honestly believe in your abilities, because I think people can really, in this sort of like last minute cram headspace, kind of decide like, oh, I'm so bad at this, I need to change everything, I need to include this, I need to change my tactic last minute. Completely just believe in yourself and get into that exam in a good headspace. If you need to do a meditation beforehand, if you need to not be standing outside with everyone else who's quickly testing you and quizzing you, which is getting you in this stressy headspace, then don't do that. Just make sure you go into the exam with a calm mindset and just make sure you know that you're ready to absolutely give your best in the exam. So thank you very much for listening to this advice. Let me know if you find it helpful, and best of luck for exam season. I'm sure that it's going to go really well. Bye.